Why are identities dangerous and why are they important to us? We live in times of prevalent toxic identity thinking. We witness ethnic and religious based genocide. We witness forced re education camps and borders being built on walls being built on borders to separate people of different ethnic and national identities at any cost. We witness rampant populist politics, which preys on erroneous uh, conceptions of identities. Opposing all of these is a key challenge for our future. The first step in doing so is to understand what identities are and what they are not. The first step is to understand and expose the erroneous logic in much of today's identity thinking and identity narratives. In some early socio-scientific thinking, identities seemed and were understood as primordial, as natural or socio-biological characteristics of people. For some time already, though, social sciences have accepted a different understanding of social identities. Social identities are not natural facts resulting from biology. They are rather historically and socially constructed. Different scholars have described, for example, nations and ethnicities as imagined, ethnic boundaries as blurry or fuzzy, or genders as performative. Furthermore, identities are contextual rather than ubiquitous. To give you an example of that, in my research in a German settlement in Paraguay uh, called Nueva Germania, people would define themselves as either Germans or Paraguayans. They would then say that what it means to be German or Paraguayan is of crucial importance, defining who a person is and what a life a person should live. This, however, would be contradicted at times, and suddenly it wouldn't matter who is German and Paraguayan. It would more matter who comes from the city and who is from the countryside, or which football club who supports. That is to say that identities are contextual, are relevant in given situations, but not relevant ubiquitously. Um, but what does it mean to say that genders are performative, ethnic boundaries are fuzzy, or that nations are imagined? Well, nations are imagined because a member of a nation will never meet the majority of people who claim to be of that nation. Furthermore, there's not one single characteristics which all people of a given nation have in common. Language is not something that all people of a nation will share, as there will be Germans who do not speak Germans, and there will be non-Germans, as in Swiss or Austrians, who do speak German. Citizenship is not a thing because there will be people who are considered to be German but don't have German citizenship or lost it in the course of their lives. Traditions are not something that all people of a nation share. There are Germans celebrating Hanukkah, Eid, and Christmas. So this unity of a nation is imagined. Ethnic boundaries are blurry because it is impossible to see exactly where some customs or way of being end and where others begin. There is no unified and clearly defined culture. No clearly defined cultures exist. Furthermore, Judith Butler famously described gender as performative. What she meant is that gender is not a pre-existing fact about us, which we then enact. It is the other way around. Um, we act in certain ways. Our behaviors, our performance constitute gender and make it into a social fact in the world. This means that gender is performative. All right, then. But aren't you denying biological differences? Some people would ask. I am not. Biological differences exist, of course. But which of those biological differences we prioritize? What meanings do we assign to those biological differences and identities? What roles do we ascribe to people? Has to do with history, politics, and a broader social imagination rather than with biology. To give you an example, just as there are different shades of skin colors, there are different sizes of feet. Imagine an oppressive system that discriminates upon the size of feet, as the apartheid system did in South Africa with skin colors. Imagine that people with big feet need to go to different bathrooms, have different jobs, and receive lower salaries. That is to say that the category of race is not a biological category. It is a socio-historical category. This example of feet size discrimination seems ridiculous. And it is ridiculous because it shows how arbitrary social identities are, but it also shows the serious consequences which identity thinking can have. This assumption that categories of a thought coincide or represent the empirical reality, that the reality out there, is called the fallacy of reification. Reification, to give you an example, can manifest in pharmacological or medical sciences in that way. It could assume that ethnic or racial categories represent a real biological difference. And this can lead to poor medical practice, bad decisions, and unequal treatment. This, for example, sometimes is the case in the USA, where it is believed that Afro-American populations have higher rates of hypertension. And this is an example of a correlation that is not a causation. If someone believes that it is this ethnic or racial difference that causes hypertension, they commit this fallacy of reification. It is rather that in the USA, the structure of inequalities laid out in a way in which Afro-Americans might have poorer access to healthcare and higher rates of poverty, which in turn cause those higher rates of hypertension. This is an example of reification in medical sciences. In socio-political context, this fallacy of reification often leads to reducing entire groups of people to social identities, which in turn are believed to tell us something about who those people are, to define people. In other words, for example, believing that saying that someone or some group of people are Jewish or Muslim actually tells us something about those people. It doesn't really. And this is the basis of most forms of xenophobia, in which people are reduced are reduced, for example, to the ethnic or religious identity, and all other aspects of the multiplicity, complexity of who a given person is are moved to the background or are considered irrelevant. This is a very dangerous logic. The toxicity of identity thinking manifests also in more banal ways, contributing to the banality of evil of today's world, using Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil. For example, maybe we would be less willing to accept certain unethical structures or certain unethical chains of production to which we contribute, and if we wouldn't separate ourselves from the victims of those unethical practices through geographic and identitarian distance. Would we be less willing to ignore the tragedy of coltan mining if the miners and the victims of coltan mining, the mineral which is necessary to production of smartphones, if the victims of it would live in Berlin or Munich, if the victims would be German and not Congolese? So after recognizing both the erroneous logic and dangers of identity thinking, one of the key questions that emerges is as follows. If identities are socially constructed and imagined, then why are they so important to us? This question inevitably has a multi-layered answer. At first, we must recognize that much of today's world is indeed socially constructed. Money, law, academic titles are all examples of such socially constructed abstractions. And such abstractions are kept alive because enough people believe in them and have vested interest in maintaining such abstractions alive. Such as abstractions are kept alive through different social and administrative structures which we have. Furthermore, we are socialized as humans into such social abstractions as money law or social identities. We assign different identities to children at birth and then teach them how to behave correspondingly. We give different toys and different clothes to boys and girls and tell them that they should behave differently. We say, boys don't cry, girls don't swear. And through that, we socialize people into what social identities are and what consequences they should have in the world. A further, and this is probably the most difficult to grasp and internalize explanation of the importance of social identities, has to do with personal identity. Personal identity in philosophy is defined as the sense of being a continuous and persistent person. In other words, the sense of being one person in time, the sense that 10, 15 years ago and now and in 15 years, this person is me and will be me. This is a sense, this personal identity is something that's very difficult to put into question because we have it so internalized and society operates so much on this assumption that indeed in time we are one person. But let us put it into question for 1 second, because it will help us to understand the importance of social identities. The first attempt to put personal identity into question comes from classic Greek philosophy. Imagine a wooden ship leaving the port of Athens. It's the metaphor of the ship of Theseus. This ship, belonging to Theseus, leaves the port of Athens and goes for a few-year-long journey along the Mediterranean Sea. Facing uncertain waters and rocky shores, different elements of the ship break and need to be replaced. And after a few years of this journey, the ship returns to the port of Athens, and every single part of the ship has now been replaced with a new part. Is it still the same ship? Is it still the ship of Theseus? Or is it a different ship? If it's a different ship, then when did it stop being the original ship of Theseus? If it's still the same ship, then where is this sameness based? Why is it still the same ship? The same is true about us. Our bodies keep changing constantly through time. There is probably very little or nothing that my current body has in common with the body of myself at birth. There is probably, even if there are a few cells which are still the same, could we really attribute the sense of being continuous and persistent to a few cells? Well, I personally doubt that. And the same would be true about our psychology, our beliefs, our preferences. It all keeps changing in time. Then why? Why do we believe we are one person if in fact we are already a different person? One of the most convincing answers to this question was given by Derek Parfit, a philosopher. He said that this belief in personal identity, this belief in being one person, is constituted through an imagination. We are indeed, we have an imaginary unity. We are not unified as we believe. And this imagined belief is constituted through chains of psychological connectedness. We should imagine this kind of chains which psychologically connect us with the past and with the future. For example, because 10 years ago I really liked beer, I still like beer, and I suppose in 10 years I will still enjoy a good beer. It helps me to believe that I am one person because I see this continuity. And I think here is where we can understand the importance of social identities. Social identities are, in fact, some of the most important chains of psychological connectedness that connect us with the past and with the future. Because at birth, I was being assigned the identity of a man. I still identify as a man, and I believe that in 15 years, I will still use the category of a man to refer to myself. And even though the content of this identity has changed, what did it mean to be a man at age 15, nowadays and in 15, 20 years' time is very different. It's not the same. After reading enough of feminist and gender scholarship, I rejected some forms of masculinity, and masculinity became something very different to me. So it is not the same, but it gives me this one name, this one category, which I can use to construct this imaginary oneness, this imaginary unity in time. To sum up though, then, these social identities are indeed imagined, socially constructed, and contextual. They feel very real to us though, because they help us to create this very sense of being one person. They provide us with this sense of continuity and persistence in time. Furthermore, we are socialized into a world in which identities are believed to be real fact in the world, and we have enough social structures to keep those identities alive. Actively recognizing the complexity, plurality, incompleteness, and even contradictoriness of every person is difficult, but I believe it is imperative. It can be difficult because it gives us a sense of uncertainty. It can challenge our long-held beliefs about nationality, ethnicity, gender, and the social world as we know it. But it can also be seen as a creative opportunity. If identities are socially constructed, that it means we can deconstruct them, construct them anew. We can do something else with them. We do not need to confine ourselves to the identities we were given. We can see ourselves and society as a work of art. We can see society as a material, as a social plasticity to work with. Challenging identity thinking is one of the key challenges which we face as humanity. It is a necessary step, I believe, in order to recognize a shared predicament as astronauts on board of the spaceship Earth and create a more just society for all. Thank you.